Father, thanks so much for this day. Thank you for your goodness to us, your blessings upon us. And I pray that you bless us mightily in all that we discuss in class today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Go ahead and get your homework that you did for today. Go ahead and get that up. You made a list of all the conflicts that you thought you found in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and identify what kind of conflicts they were. Now, before we dive in, who can remember the 5 different types of conflicts that we went through yesterday? What are they? Casey, tell me one.
Man versus supernatural / God.
Excellent. And it would be more like gods in that they're like Greek, Roman, mythological gods rather than the one true God. Though some people, of course, believe that the one true God is against what they need or want, and that the one true God is their antagonist rather than the ultimate hero. So it depends on, I guess, your worldview. Joel.
Man versus man.
Very good. Bryant.
Man versus nature.
Very good. Kylie. So far we have man versus man, man versus supernatural, man versus nature.
Man versus society.
Very good. Mia.
Man versus self.
Excellent. And of course, sometimes people will say that there's also man versus technology. And I think probably those people have been in Zoom meetings like this. And so they were like, well, that happens. But we could probably have a situation like that. So if you wanted to have 6, man versus technology could indeed be 1, because of course you can have all kinds of things that go wrong with technology, robots, planes, pretty much everything nowadays. So man versus tech, yes, that could be 1. Though in literature, honestly, there may be some, but there's not too many examples of that, probably because technology really has developed quite a lot in the recent years. Okay, brilliant, excellent. Now the next question is, what do each of those mean? So before we dive into your examples, we need to understand what each of those types of conflicts are, what it looks like. So let's start with man versus man. What does that look like? What do we know about that one? Lorelai, yes. I can't hear you, I'm afraid. Maybe, hang on a second. No? Okay, it's not just me. Is it connected your end? Yes. And I would, when we're saying who it's against, say the protagonist first. So it's protagonist versus antagonist. And yes, the point there is they're kind of a level playing field, in that you have someone of their own kind, in a sense, I would say. But it's a little bit tricky when we get into anthropomorphizing. Joel, anything to add there?
No.
Okay. Do you want to tell us the man versus nature?
It's like the protagonist is like it's almost like the nature is the antagonist in the story. So like the tornado or tsunami is supposed to be the antagonist against the protagonist. Good.
And does the antagonist in that situation have really, thoughts, feelings? Are they out to get the protagonist?
No.
No, they're just doing what nature does, right? There are storms, there are tornadoes, there are all kinds of things. Some days are windy, some days are not. So yeah, it's just nature being nature. It's not like they've got a, nature's suddenly being like, I'm going to get that guy. Mia,
I was just gonna do a new one.
do a new one. Pick one, and one of the ones we haven't done yet.
Man versus society, which is like a struggle against the government.
Yes, good. And that can come across in all kinds of different ways, right? We had the example of having a red light at an inopportune moment for the protagonist, that sort of thing. Kylie.
Has man versus self been mentioned yet?
No.
Okay, because I was gonna say that man versus self is like you are like the protagonist, like trying to fight, like to do, like Edmund almost like it seemed like he was against himself. Like I'm using him as an example because it really seemed like he was trying to fight because he thought the White Witch was good and he was like confused and it seemed like he knew what was bad, but he was like fighting himself to try to make the right decision without making the right decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. And I think Edmund, we can probably all think of examples with Edmund for man versus self. And this one's one that should be very relatable. This is just life. We have this all the time, right? In cartoons, it is visualized by having the little, devil on one shoulder, angel on another, right? That is basically just trying to help picture the idea that man has a conscience, right? To steal the cookie or to not steal the cookie in the man versus stomach, right? The stomach says, steal that cookie. Against all odds, get the cookie. And then the protagonist says, but mom said, don't eat the cookies. We've got guests coming for dinner. What do? Right? And then you have this internal struggle. And that's where the internal versus external comes into play, right? Because this is internal. It all happens in the heart. But it's a little bit confusing because it looks like it's the protagonist against himself, which is exactly what it is. Okay, final one. I think we have one more left. Did everyone spot what it was? Katie, yes.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this one's it, but I didn't hear everything Kylie said, so because everyone was breaking up. Isn't it man versus supernatural?
Yes, that is the one that we did not discuss. So what does that look
so it's just like protagonist versus like a vampire, or like a ghost or a zombie or etc.
like? Good. Yes. Something that is not part of the natural world. Does not have human powers. It can go through walls. Things like that. Exactly. Kylie.
So I had a question. I didn't write this down, but I kept thinking about it. Like Aslan versus the White Witch. I was wondering what, like, if that would be in a category because it's like magic versus magic.
Yeah. Because they're both not natural, right? But at the same time, Aslan is, because he's the one who's created Narnia. So this one's a tricky one because we have the normal world where the children are from, and then you have Narnia where talking beasts is natural, right? It's the created order of Narnia. So it is tricky, and we'll go ahead and we'll discuss that in more detail as we go through, because I do want to discuss that. Well, okay. So conflicts. The thing to note about conflicts is that a book can have many conflicts. Maybe you guys realize this as you were writing down all the conflicts that you were finding. There are quite a few, right? Between all of the conflicts that happen internally and the difficulties that happen outside, we have quite a few conflicts. So what conflicts did you find and how did you identify them? What conflicts did you find? It doesn't have to be one of the main conflicts. Let's go ahead and raise hands so that you can just explain. Yeah. Narnia versus Winter. Jack, what kind of conflict is that?
Man versus nature.
Man versus nature. Okay, is it natural that it is always winter? Is that natural? Is it natural in Narnia? As in that's how Aslan made Narnia to be? No. Interesting. Who is making it all winter? The White Witch. So maybe for that one, it's actually Narnia versus the White Witch, right? Narnia wants it to be as Aslan has created it, right? With the seasons, winter, Father Christmas. So Narnia as a place, sure, is experiencing the White Witch because it's all winter, but the Narnians are also experiencing it. So I understand when you say that Narnia, it's Narnia including the Narnians versus the White Witch, right? That's one. I agree. Now the question is, and this brings us to the question that has already been brought up, what kind of conflict is that? So in the chat box, what do we think about this one that Jack has mentioned? So the Narnians versus the White Witch. And it is helpful to think of the name of the White Witch. Yeah, I think it'd be man versus the supernatural. Because everything in Narnia, the Narnians are anthropomorphized, right? That's part of what Narnia is. So I think man versus supernatural. Okay, let me go ahead and get my notes up here so I can keep a track. So Narnians versus the White Witch equals man versus supernatural. Okay, very good. Let me see. I'm going to pick someone who has not gone yet. James.
Tumnus versus government when he saves Lucy and then he's captured.
Ooh, I like it. Go ahead and explain that.
I thought it was against government because he said how he was following the witch's rules, but then he went against it and then he got punished for it.
Yes. So the rule of the White Witch equals man versus society. Okay, and obviously it's the new society, but I think that's a great one. Nicely done. Do you have something to add there, James? No. Okay, Audra.
Okay, so this isn't people, but I did think it was maybe a good thing to include, and that's betrayal versus forgiveness.
Okay, so who betrayed?
Edmund.
And who forgave?
Their siblings.
Okay, the siblings, Aslan also. So if we see the people who are behind those two, would you say that Edmund is against Aslan? Like, it's like they're in conflict together, that Aslan is against what Edmund needs or wants? Or the children, the rest of the children, is against what Edmund needs or wants? What do you think?
Well, I think they don't really agree with the choice that he made, but that doesn't mean like they hate him.
So there, does Edmund end up agreeing with the choice that he made?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so then that actually, the betrayal and forgiveness is a result, you know, that combination seems to be more of a result of Edmund's internal struggle, right? He betrays because the bad side of him wins. The bad side of him wins, which means that he needs forgiveness, right? And of course, the children and Aslan have a choice whether or not they're going to forgive him, and of course they do. So it definitely is an interesting one. I would say that betrayal and forgiveness would be more closer to what we would call a theme, right? Something that C.S. Lewis gives throughout the book, which I think is a great thing to note. But I think we would want to identify it more as Edmund versus self, because that's kind of what's behind both of those. So let's go ahead and put that down. So we have Edmund versus Edmund, which is Edmund versus self. And I'll put in brackets when betraying Aslan and the rest of the kids, right? That's something that we have there. Very good. Anna.
So I did Peter, Susan, and Lucy versus Edmund because, like, during the beginning of the book, I know at the end they all forgive each other, but a lot of the book, Edmund believes the White Witch is good and Aslan isn't. And Edmund, Susan, and Peter, sorry, no, not Edmund, sorry. Lucy, Susan, and Peter think Aslan is good and the White Witch is bad.
Okay, yeah. Now this is a tricky one because Edmund, according to all of your descriptions, Edmund and the quiz, Edmund is part of the protagonists. So this one's interesting because Edmund is, this also is kind of Edmund versus self, because Edmund does end up becoming kind of like an enemy, but because of his choice. Because just like you said, he chooses the White Witch. He has it backwards. The White Witch is the goodie and Aslan is the baddie. So Peter, Susan, Lucy versus Edmund, how would we describe that in the man versus blank?
I think I did man versus man.
Good. Excellent. And it's man versus man with a hint of man versus self on Edmund's side as well, right? So because it's all kind of jumbled up into the whole deal of Edmund betraying them all. Very good. I like it. Joel.
Okay, so one of mine was one of mine, it was the same as Anna's when it was Edmund betraying his siblings. And I said that was man versus man.
Okay, good. Excellent. Kylie.
I don't know if this has already been said, but I put as one of them Pevensies versus White Witch, which is man versus God or supernatural.
Okay, White Witch, man versus supernatural. Okay, the supernatural who would make it always be winter and never Christmas, the supernatural who has the power to turn people into stone, all these things. Katie. Can't currently hear you, Katie. Are you oh, I think she might be frozen. Oh, she's back.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
You were frozen, so I didn't hear you call me.
Well, you were frozen, so I thought you didn't hear me call you. How?
Okay. So I did Edmund versus Edmund as man versus self.
Sorry, say that again.
Edmund versus Edmund. Edmund, I put that as man versus self.
Okay. And what particular point are you thinking about? Is there a particular section here?
Whenever he's walking from the beaver's house to the White Witch's castle, he's like saying, no, but she really is good. She's better than that awful Aslan anyway. So he's trying to convince himself that the White Witch is good and that she only wants what's good for him.
Good. And I like the way that you put that, trying to convince himself. That really shows the internal struggle there, right? There is a hint of doubt in there, but he's trying to convince himself that the witch is good and Aslan is bad. Very good. Bryant.
At the beginning of the book, when they find Mr. Tumnus's house, that it's been attacked by the wolves, it shows that Susan wants to return back home. So I put Susan versus going back home as man versus self. Because she's like afraid. She wants to go back home because she sees it's not safe.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So Susan versus Susan, which is Susan versus self, or man versus self. And that's an interesting one. Susan wants to return home after seeing the house of Mr. Tumnus. And the thing we want to remember is that when we have an antagonist, whether or not the antagonist is ourselves, the antagonist is against what we need or want. Okay. Now here, the antagonist, the self within Susan, is actually is a temptation against what she needs to do, which is to save Narnia. Right? If she leaves, Narnia is not saved. The entire goal is in jeopardy at this point, even though it's such a small little moment of like, where's Mr. Tumnus? I want to go home. This is getting too close for comfort, right? Which we would all understand. Okay. Any others? Can we think of any others? James.
The Pavensi children versus the rain in the beginning, and it makes them all have to stay inside instead of going and adventuring.
All right. Versus rain. So that is man versus nature. The rain makes them stay inside when they want to go outside. Right? You're like, oh, relate. Joel.
So one of them was the White Witch killing Aslan, and that one I put man versus supernatural god.
Okay, so the White Witch versus Aslan, is that what you said?
Yeah, the White Witch killing Aslan.
Killing Aslan. So that would be Aslan versus the White Witch, because right, the protagonist always goes first. I mean, it means the same thing, but it just helps to know always who is on the good side versus White Witch. Man versus supernatural. Though this one's interesting because what happens in this situation? Aslan versus White Witch, man versus supernatural at the stone table. Yes, exactly. Aslan comes back. He defeats death completely. So although it looks like the White Witch wins, Aslan actually wins. And both of those are not natural. Yes. Well, you've all read the story at this point. Okay. So it's kind of like supernatural versus supernatural. It kind of gets kind of weird there. Weird but wonderful. Kylie.
So I didn't write this down, but I started thinking about it more, and I kind of thought like it. At some parts, it seems like in the beginning, it's like Pevensies versus Lucy, or Lucy versus Pevensies, because like she knows like the wardrobe is real, but they don't really believe her, even though she's truthful. Like they're going back and forth, like believing her, but she's like no, she knows that it's real. And then Edmund, he actually goes in, then he acts like he's still against her and like playing. And so I just feel like that was like something that stuck out to me that I just noticed. But like that'd be man.
Yeah. Yeah, good. So Lucy versus the rest of the Pevensey kids, specifically at the beginning, when they believe she's lying, and she's not lying. And it's frustrating because she's not lying. And then Edmund's, of course, really, really mean to her. So we could say Lucy versus the Pevensey kids. That's obviously man versus man. And we'll put in brackets, the rest of the kids believe that Lucy is lying. Wow, we are getting so many conflicts. I think we could go ahead and actually say a specific one right here, which is Lucy versus Edmund, right? Because Edmund very specifically goes against Lucy. Lucy wants them to believe her, and she thinks that Edmund will finally be able to support her and back her up. But does he? No. Oh dear. So that'd be man versus man there as well. Anna.
I was just kind of thinking maybe you could do Mr. Tumnus versus the White Witch, because he was gonna like working for her. When he found Lucy, he was gonna take her to the White Witch, but eventually he believes it's wrong, and then she turns into stone.
Yes, good. And what kind would that be? Man versus what?
Supernatural. Or would it be like supernatural versus supernatural, because Mr. Tumnus isn't normal?
But he is normal for Narnia.
Oh,
So it's kind of a weird one. He's not normal for the kids, but he's just being a normal Narnian here. Whereas the White Witch is supernatural in comparison to normal Narnia. Woo, my goodness, we're getting so many. James, is that an alt hand, or do you have something to add there? Okay, Bryant, yeah.
Could there be like Father Christmas versus the White Witch? Or did we already write that down?
We didn't already write down that. In what sense?
That he says that the witch doesn't let him, or isn't letting him in because of the winter, that she never lets it become Christmas, that he finally breaks in.
Yeah, so there's Father Christmas. He really wants to give people presents, and the White Witch won't let him. No presents. Yes, exactly. Wow, the White Witch is really, we're really seeing the White Witch here. I think you guys get it, that the White Witch is the baddie here. I know. Well, more like she's against everyone, isn't she? So that maybe we would say man versus supernatural. So Father Christmas is kind of supernatural too. In the sense that she's going down chimneys, supposedly. Jill.
I did Aslan and his army versus the White Witch and her army. Then I
Mm.
put that down as man versus supernatural.
Yeah. Good. Lydia, yeah.
I put Mr. Thomas versus
Versus
self.
self. Oh, yes. What particular section are you thinking of there, Lydia?
When he was going to kidnap Lucy and he had like a little battle with himself, like, no, I need to let you go.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one because Lucy actually is the one who persuades him, right? She's like, oh, but you're not going to do that, are you? So it's almost like Mrs. Thomas also versus Lucy at the same time. Like, oh boy. Yeah, in fact, you can always say it's Mr. Thomas versus self versus the White Witch versus Lucy. Oh boy. Okay, yes. Great. Mia.
I did witch versus spring, and I did that as man versus nature.
Okay, there is only one problem with the way that you mentioned that. According to how you put that, it looks like the witch is in the right. The witch is the goody here, and spring is the baddie.
So
Like-
spring versus witch.
There you go. Exactly. So that obviously spring is natural. The witch is against the natural. That was an interesting one because it's not exactly man. It's more just it's actually a very significant thing because when Jesus comes to save us, did he just save human beings?
No.
What does he save? What is affected? Is it just us that is affected or the whole world?
The whole world.
Right, because the whole world is affected when sin enters it, right? The entire world is affected. Suddenly Adam has to garden with thorns. All of creation is affected. And it's almost like Lewis knows this. In fact, he probably does, doesn't he? Right? That when we have spring versus the White Witch, the fact that spring is finally able to come back, all of Narnia, when the White Witch enters Narnia, all of Narnia is fallen, right? It's affected. And when Aslan returns, all of creation begins getting back to where it should have been at the beginning, i.e. spring can finally come back. Oh, that one's interesting, Elijah. If only, I think it would work if only we knew that it was really an apple that Adam ate, which we don't. We just know it was a fruit. It could have been a pineapple for all we know. Okay. Excellent. Now, you guys have found some fantastic conflicts here. Now we have a very important question though. And that question is, what is the main big conflict? What is the main big conflict? Now, what we have to remember is that by finding the main big conflict, we're finding the main antagonist. And I think the main antagonist is pretty clear. But what does an antagonist do? Can anyone remember the definition of our antagonist? Joel.
It's like trying to, it's like the person who who doesn't want what the protagonist wants. He's against what the protagonist is for.
Yes, very good. Casey, anything to add there?
He's the bad guy. Also the character whom the protagonist struggles against.
Good, excellent. Kylie, anything to add there?
He might not always be like a villain or actually cruel, just in the way.
Okay. Now, the White Witch is the antagonist. Is the White Witch evil through and through? Does she have any redeeming qualities just hidden away there? Besides maybe having Turkish delight that tastes really good but is terrible. Yeah, no redeeming qualities, right? She's not going to be redeemed. She has to be defeated. So she's clearly our antagonist. Now the question is, who is she fighting against? Okay, what does Aslan need or want? What is the big deal? Aslan wasn't present when the kids entered, right? So what's going on here? Yes. He wants winter to end, and the only way for winter to end is if Aslan returns and does what? Well, yes, kill the White Witch, yes. But what does he need to do? It has been said, I think, yes, put those kids on that throne at Caer Paravel. Bryant.
I have a question. Is Aslan a king?
He is the ultimate king and creator of Narnia, yes.
But then it says his father, there's his father who's the maker of the deep magic, or was it?
Why does it say
thing,
that?
magic thing. Well, I went and found the name of the man of the name that they say that made the deep magic rule, whatever it was. And I searched it. I searched it up and said that was his father. That was Aslan's father.
But where did it say that?
When he's arguing with the witch over Edmund, that all traders go to her, that they belong to her, then she says, "Don't you remember the deep magic?" The deep magic thing. He says, "No, I don't remember. Can you remind me?" So then she tells him about it. I can't. Let me try to find the chapter.
Yeah, that one's interesting. So far from what you've said, what I found really interesting is the fact that it's the White Witch speaking. Because she knows everything, right?
Yeah.
And she's going to tell the truth. Joel, while Brian's looking, do you have something to say?
I had a question.
Yeah.
So what would happen if the protagonist was a supernatural or like a god, and the antagonist was a supernatural or god? How would you write that down? Would it just be supernatural versus supernatural?
Yeah. I think that's what it would end up being. Or even, I think that's what it would end up being, because it's not exactly man versus man. It's not like the supernaturalness cancels each other out. Yeah. Any luck, Bryant?
Yes, I'm on the page. Let me just find where
What chapter is it in, so that everyone can find it as well?
Chapter 13.
Chapter 13. Okay.
So it says, "Oh, Aslan," whispered Susan in the lion's ear. "Can't we, I mean, you, won't, will you?" When he's talking about Edmund giving him to the White Witch. "Can't we do something about the deep magic? Isn't there something you can work against it? Work against the Emperor's magic," said Aslan, turning to her with something like a frown on his face, and nobody ever made that suggestion to him again.
Okay. Deep magic. Deeper magic from before the dawn of time. Okay. So, have you forgotten the deep magic? Work against the Emperor's magic. So that, I think there are two very, very important things to note. Okay. Very, very important. And C.S. Lewis is very clear about this. And that is that this is not an allegory. i.e., he's not saying that Aslan is Jesus in this story. What? This is what he's saying. He's saying if there was a different world, and this was the world, out there, then Aslan would be Jesus if that world existed. Okay. Which is different from something, say, like Pilgrim's Progress, which is this stands for this, and this means this, and this always equals this, right? So it's not he's not trying to replicate everything that has happened in the Bible. He's not trying to replicate it and say, okay, this is a one-to-one correlation. Okay. Instead, he's saying there is this world. If this world existed, which it does in my head, right? Then Aslan would be Jesus, would be like Jesus in this situation. And why is he like Jesus? Well, because he dies for the sake of the betrayer, in the place of the betrayer, and death does not hold him. Now, when we have the emperor, it's possible that maybe C.S. Lewis is thinking of Jesus and the Father, right? There is the Father before the dawn of time. There's this deeper magic. But again, it's not this direct correlation, right? Because we know that the Father and Jesus are one, right? Whereas it very much sounds like the emperor is someone who is different from Aslan, who is over Aslan. So there isn't this direct correlation there. But I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really important part. Brendan.
So this may or may not apply, but in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where the three cousins are about to leave, Lucy is like, "Will I ever see you again?" And Aslan's like, "In your world, I have another name, and you must know me by that name." In the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So actually, I think that it is kind
of. Yes, but he's not saying that Aslan and Jesus are the same person, right? Even in that situation. It's just that Jesus is known by a different name in both worlds, right? They are different worlds. Let's see, Levi, your question here. Would Aslan versus death be supernatural versus death or man versus death? That one's an interesting one, because death isn't supernatural. So that would actually be more like the supernatural versus nature, or man versus nature, right? Because death is a natural thing now. Does that make sense? Okay. So what does Aslan, if you get back to the original question, what does Aslan need or want? He needs and wants the 4 children to be seated on the thrones at Cair Paravel. Right? And because the kids are part of what his will is, that's why in the quiz, when I asked you who were the protagonists, the kids are also kind of the protagonist, right? Because for the kids to survive, that is crucial for Aslan to accomplish his will, right? And most of the time, the kids are on Aslan's side. So therefore, it's almost like they are part of the protagonist. But you guys are right. The main thing is Aslan versus the White Witch. And of course, on the side of Aslan are the kids, are the Narnians that are supporting Aslan, like the Beavers, Mr. Tumnus, all of those people. Because you have this very key conflict, all of the other conflicts, I don't know whether you noticed this, but all of the other conflicts basically fall out underneath that one big conflict in terms of sides, right? You have the witches' side and those who are on the witches' side, and those who kind of end up falling onto the witches' side or deciding to go on the witches' side, like Edmund initially. And then you have those who are on Aslan's side. Okay, so the key thing to note here is what we've just discussed, which is that the main conflict, I want you all to write this down, main conflict, Aslan versus the White Witch. Okay, and then below that, say Aslan needs and wants the 4 children to be on the thrones at Cair Paravel. The witch tries to stop him. And note, when we have the witch, how does the witch killing Aslan connect to all of this? Because if the witch kills Aslan, then there are still the 4 kids. So surely the 4 kids can still get onto the throne, right? And then Narnia is set free. So, without Aslan, she has the power. Who cares? She gets to do what she wants. That's her idea, right? Without Aslan, anything is possible. Okay, now for the homework today. Okay, what I would like you to do is I would like you to, obviously you're writing down what the main conflict is. Okay, and then let's see. No. Very simple here. Whenever you have a conflict, that conflict needs to be resolved, right? The problem needs to be resolved. So you have one question, and it should be a pretty simple one. I want you to answer, how is the conflict, the main conflict that we've discussed, resolved? Okay? According to the story. So and I want you to write about 5 sentences, 4 to 5 sentences explaining how the conflict is resolved. Remembering that the conflict is Aslan needs and wants the 4 children to be on the thrones at Paravel. The witch tries to stop him. So how does the witch try and stop him? What happens? Do the kids get to the throne at Cair Paravel? Okay, should be a clear answer because you've read the book. All right, go ahead and submit that and we'll discuss it tomorrow. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for this day. for your goodness to us, your blessings upon us. And I pray that you bless us mightily as we head into the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen. And it's just for the main conflict. It's not for all of the other conflicts. It's just for the main one, because all of the other conflicts get resolved by this main conflict getting resolved. Yes, Anna.
So my quiz was.
Oh, you muted. You got your quiz,
Sorry.
and then.
And I was wondering if you could send me the form so I could see which one I got wrong.
Yes, I can do that. I'll do that this afternoon sometime, okay? Sweet. See you tomorrow.